You're listening to Pedaling Through Life, a 1,000-kilometer father-son Ashtavinayak Cycling Pilgrimage, presented by Shriram and Sunil KHANDBAHALE.
Wheels of Wonder, a young cycle's journey with Shriram, as told by Shriram's bicycle. They say every adventure begins with a spark. For me, it began with a smile. Shriram's smile, that mischievous, unstoppable, let's do this kind of smile. I still remember the day he picked me up from the store. His eyes gleamed brighter than my polished frame. He ran his fingers over my handlebar, like an artist feeling a new instrument. And when he said softly, "You and I will go places," I knew he meant it, literally. At that time, I had no idea how far those places would be. 1,000 kilometers later, I'd learned that roads don't just stretch across maps, they stretch across hearts. The journey begins, pedals, prayers, and playfulness. The first day of the Ashtavinayak Cycling Pilgrimage felt like the beginning of a festival. The morning air was crisp, the roads were open, and my wheels were singing. Beside me rode another cycle, older, heavier, quieter, carrying his father, Sunil. I looked at her and nodded like a young colt to an old horse. Let's see who keeps up. She didn't reply, just rolled forward gracefully. But over the next few days, I understood her silence. She wasn't competing, she was meditating. Meanwhile, my rider was all enthusiasm. He clicked photos, waved at villagers, and shouted, "Ganpati Bappa Moria," every few kilometers. Sometimes he'd race ahead, sometimes he'd stop just to feel the breeze. I loved his rhythm, impulsive yet sincere. Where his father sought devotion, Shriram sought discovery. And I carried both. Through rain and radiance. Ah, the rain. My favorite companion. It would drum on my frame, run down my spokes, and wash away the dust of the miles. I remember Jejuri, that golden town where turmeric floated in the air like sunlight. Shriram laughed through the streets, his face painted with yellow dust and joy. When he called home on video to share the scene, even his phone camera couldn't keep up with his excitement. That night, parked under a lodge window, I listened to father and son talk softly. Shriram was tired, but his voice had that tone of victory, that quiet pride of having earned sleep through effort. I think humans underestimate what exhaustion can teach, that tiredness can be sacred when it comes from purpose. Lessons in motion. I saw my rider grow on the road. Not just in stamina, but in spirit. He learned to fix a puncture without complaining. He learned that downhill speed feels glorious only because uphill climbs demand grit. He learned that silence on the road isn't emptiness, it's peace. There were moments when he'd stop suddenly just to look around. A herd of cows crossing, an old farmer smiling, children shouting, "Cycle, cycle!" and running beside us. I could sense the gears turning in his mind, not mine, his. He was beginning to see the world, not just move through it. At Lonavala, as fog hugged the hills, he went speechless. I could feel his breath slow, his heart steady. The boy who began this trip with energy was now learning stillness. That's the thing about long rides. You start by chasing the wind and end by listening to it. The bond beyond miles. Sometimes I'd glance at the other cycle. She carried Sunil with quiet dignity, a steady companion to a steady man. When both of us rested at a temple or roadside tea stall, she'd say softly, "He's teaching his son to live, not just to ride." And I'd reply, "And the son is teaching him to smile again." Together, we carried 2 generations, one seeking meaning, one creating it. They didn't always speak much, but their bond was in their rhythm. When one slowed down, the other waited. When one was silent, the other hummed a tune. Even their laughter sounded synchronized. A perfect cadence of father and son, man and boy, past and future. Moments I'll never forget. I'll never forget that hot, sunny afternoon when we stopped at a roadside tea stall. The lady served steaming chai in tiny glasses. Shriram took a sip, made a face, and said, "Too sweet," and then laughed, finishing it anyway. Simple joy, no filters. Or that night in Pali, when they went for the holy hot water bath. I waited under the stars while the temple bells echoed in the distance. I could imagine Shriram splashing in the sacred water, his laughter mixing with the chants, youth meeting divinity in the most innocent way. And the next morning, as we started for home, he patted my seat gently and whispered, "You did great, buddy." For a cycle, that's like receiving a medal. The ride home, reflections and realizations. The road back was quieter. Not because there was less to see, but because there was more to feel. I think Shriram had changed. He wasn't just cycling anymore. He was understanding. He began to ride slower, noticing details he'd missed before. The way light broke through clouds, the smell of wet soil, the sound of temple bells fading behind. He no longer raced ahead. He matched his father's pace, side by side, wheel to wheel. It was no longer a journey of two speeds, but of one heartbeat. By the time we reached Nashik, his smile had matured. It wasn't the grin of a boy who conquered roads, but the peace of a young man who discovered himself. What I learned as his cycle live. I was born to move, but in this pilgrimage, I learned to pause. I learned that the meaning of travel isn't in kilometers, but in connections. I learned that companionship, whether between man and machine or father and son, is the true fuel for any journey. Most of all, and that growing up doesn't mean losing curiosity. It means finding wisdom in wonder. When we reached home, I stood outside, wet, muddy, tired, but my heart, if I had one, was full. Inside, the family's laughter echoed like temple bells. I heard Shriram telling his sister stories, his father smiling quietly beside him. And I realized, for all my thousands of rotations, the most meaningful distance I helped him cover was not on the road, but the one between childhood and understanding. If I could speak to other young riders, I'd tell them this. Ride far, get lost, sweat, fall, fix, learn. Because on the road, you don't just find new places, you find new versions of yourself. I am just a bicycle, gears, brakes, and a bell that still rings faintly of rain and laughter. But to me, this was more than a ride. It was a chapter of life written on asphalt and faith, a story of two hearts, two wheels, and one beautiful road home.
You've been listening to Pedaling Through Life, a 1,000-kilometer father-son Ashtavinayak Cycling Pilgrimage, presented by Shriram and Sunil. The journey continues. See you on the next ride.